pretty much the rest of the chapters in the book. We're going to do hands-on as much as we can in class. So if you would, start up PyCharm. And while you're doing that, we're going to talk about some of the capabilities in PyCharm. And this is one of the reasons I like to use this interpreter. It's got the capabilities that you're likely to find in tools that you would use if you were out there actually doing production. So one of the reasons that I want to show you this is some of the tools that we're going to look at can actually save your bacon as you're going through and coding. So to get us started, if you have Python up or in the process of bringing it up, make sure that you have your line numbers on. And one of the ways that we can do that, we looked at earlier in the semester, we can go out to the options and turn them on, but that's a lot of keystrokes and it's hard to find sometimes. The other way that you can turn line numbers and indent on within PyCharm is right-click on the gutter between the code window and the file directory. And it'll bring up a 3-option little flyout menu that lets you work with showing line numbers, the indent guide, and then also turn on and off soft wraps. So that if you don't have it on, that's an easy way to turn it on and work with. All right, I'm going to give you this code in blocks of 10 lines. Again, it's out on the D2L site. If you want to go out there and look at it and copy it in, I'll give you a couple of minutes to get the code in, and we're going to work with this code the first part of the morning. I think it's in the week 4 folder. Right here. Once you get the code in, go ahead and run it a couple of times, get comfortable with how the code operates and how you put the inputs in. So if you run the code, this is what it's going to look like. You've got the grades that are entered, you can average it out, and then you're done. So what we want to do is go in and now modify this script and see how we can go back and take a look at different options once we make that modification. So if you would, make the following mod to the student name input line. And we're just changing the text to enter student name. Run your code again to make sure that the code runs properly. So now when we run the program, we get just a shorter prompt. Yes?
When I run it, I'll put in grades, but it won't average. It says the average is this, but it just gives me what seems like a total of all the averages.
Okay, I'll troubleshoot it for you afterwards. Okay. If it's not running for you, let me take a look at it after class and we'll see if we can figure it out. What we want to look at, though, is you've made the changes and now all of a sudden you want to go back. So what you can do is move your cursor to the code window and right-click. And if you go down about 2/3 of the way in that flyout menu that comes up, you have an option called Local History. So click on Local History and then bring up the option that says Show History. That should look something like that. So click on Show History. Now this next slide is going to be a little difficult to read, but I hope you'll get the idea. When you click on Show History, what comes up is the code that you just ran and the previous version of that code. So once you get this code window up, above it you'll be able to see, if I can get the computer to work, how far back your changes go. Now, this is one that I did, I think, last night as an example. And so it shows that within the last 12 hours, I had one change. Let me show you this slide. This is one that we worked on last summer. So this has got a couple of different changes that are available. So you can look at your code changes and actually go in and revert. So in your case, what you want to click on is the option that's available in that last 12-hour window. Right-click on it, and it'll give you the option to revert. And if you click revert and then go back to your code window, our code's gone back to the way it was originally. A handy little tool to have in your back pocket when you're take a look at the beginning of your code, and we want to find where we define the variable enter grade. And let's assume that we want to change that, and we want to change that variable. Now, there are a couple ways we can do it. We can go through and hope when we walk through the code that we catch every instance of it. Or we can change the first instance, run the code, get the error, change the second instance, so on and so forth. But there's an easier way. If you right-click on that highlighted variable, it'll bring up this flyout menu. Go down about halfway and you'll see an option called refactor. We're refactoring is what we're doing. And you have several different options to refactor. The one we're going to use most in the class is the rename function. So go ahead and click on rename, and now you can go up and rename enter grades. And once you press return, it updates enter grades throughout your entire script. So you can see that down where we look at while, enter grades, and so on. Track it through your script, and it works extremely well. So again, two functions that we have available in PyCharm that are very useful to us. And again, here's the option shown, what it was originally, what we changed it to. The code that we've written so far, we don't really need this next function, but it's an option that's out there in our coding window, and it's called folding. And what folding does is automatically close up code like our definition. So if we went back and looked at the definition, we run several, 20 lines or 25 lines of code as you look at it. If we go ahead and click on folding and then the option to collapse in this case, it will automatically collapse our code for us. Yes, we could also click the plus sign, minus sign, plus sign behind it, and that works extremely well too. But if you have several different options, you may want to go through that collapse function to collapse your code. Sometimes it's easier than clicking on the plus and minus. So those are a couple of the things that we have available in PyCharm. And as we get farther in to the textbook, we'll take a look at some more of them and how we might apply them in the course and how they could be applied out in the brave new world. All right, some high points from the textbook. This is still a little bit of review from what we had when we did the boot camp, what some of you had when you did fundamentals with some of the faculty last fall, but these are things that you should remember and keep in mind as we go through. In the upper right hand corner is the page where all this is listed, and again it's out on the D2L site. So what we're looking at first is our variable names should start with a letter or an underscore. And we know we can have letters, we can have numbers, and we can have the underscore. So letter and underscore, it would look like that. Pretty simple, something you should remember. One of the things that our textbook points out that we haven't talked about to this point, that in Python coding with professionals, the consistency seems to be to take a constant, either a numeric or a character string, and if that constant is never going to change, then do it all in capital letters. Remember, we talked about camel case and we talked about lowercase, but when you're looking at a constant, you may want to indicate it as all capital letters. A point from the textbook. Next, we want to use comments to explain our code. So as you're going through, if you're setting up a formula, if you're setting up a certain sequence for inputs from the end user to make your program work, you might want to put a couple of notes either above or to the right side of your code to explain why it's working. My preference when I comment my code that way, I always put it above. You put it off to the right side, and for some reason you need to print it out as a PDF or print it out on an actual hard copy printer, you may not get all of the comment. However, I want you to remember that code comments are not or do not take place of good documentation. At the end of the semester, you're going to get to write a program. It has to have documentation with it. I'll be the end user. I won't know anything about your code. I'm not going to look at the code first. I'm going to run your program. If I can't run the program from the user guide, you can figure out what happens after that. All right, the last thing is one of the best ways to approach our coding in this course is make sure all your variables are created first. I like to set it up with a commented block that says variables. And if I have global variables, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks, or just local variables, I'm going to indicate global or local in my variables. But I set all those up first. Next thing the textbook points out that I want to bring to your attention is something called a magic number. And the example they give is figuring out volumes and liters and ounces and soda cans and all that. But their point is well taken. We have no idea what that 2 is. It's a magic number. It just appeared from somewhere. So what we want to do is create a variable that would indicate for us what that 2 is. In the textbook, we also go through several of the different math functions and things that we can work with. The table on page, I think it's page 38, is a pretty good table, and it talks to you about a couple of things. Integers, how we're going to get decimals, how we're going to get the last digit, or not get the last digit, how to look at the last couple of digits. So be familiar with this, at least know where it is. I don't expect you to be able to quote this stuff off the top of your head or code it from memory. I wouldn't give you an assignment where I wouldn't let you use the textbook. But just have an idea of where these are referenced so you can work with them. These are some options that we can work with as examples. If you want to try them, I'll give you a couple of seconds to code them. What we're looking at in this first option is a piece of code that ran and told us what the last number was. All right. This one we're looking at the first 2 numbers, and this one we're looking at the last 2 numbers. So just to give you a feel on how that works.
What is the symbol that you're using for the
This is actually the percent sign. We look at a couple of different options, and one in particular that we want to talk about is absolute value. So in the little example I have on the screen, 3 lines of code, the print statement in line 16 is just to give a space between the predetermined printout in PyCharm. 17, we have a minus distance, and then I pulled this out of something I wrote out at FAA. Print the distance from the approach end. Well, if you're minus 12 miles from the approach end, you know, you could interpret that as under the ground or whatever. But I wanted to show it as an absolute value. So we use the reserved word ABS. And this is in the standard Python library. So you don't have to define any new function. ABS is just out there as an absolute value. And so when you run this, distance from the approach end is 12. All right, pretty simple. And so on 41, along with ABS, it talks about some other variable modifiers that we can work with, if you will. These are the functions we're rounding out to certain decimal places. We're looking at the min and the max. Again, all good tools that we're going to use sometime during the remainder of the course. If you would actually go in and program these, it would look something like this. We're rounding 9.63 out to 10. We're rounding 9.63, comma 1 to 1 decimal place. That's pretty simple. Max is pretty easy to find. You can hide the number in as long a sequence as you want to, and it will always pick out that largest number. And then the last one, the same thing. Hide that smallest number anywhere you want to, and Python will go in and pick it out. Again, tools and functions that we can use with our variables that will help us present the result, the information from the data that we've gathered that our end user wants. By the way, if you didn't look at the beginning of the book, you'll notice throughout there, the chapters, you'll see what I call the dead parrot laying on its back. And that refers to common errors that a lot of coders make when they get into certain parts of Python that we're discussing. So you can look at the dead parrot and see what errors are there, and then learn not to make them. Page 49, we're taking a look at something called concatenation. There are several different ways we can use this tool. Probably the easiest example is, let's say we're reading a data file in, and we're going to create some information from that data file. And we'll be doing that after, or I think right before we go on spring break. So let's say that we're reading the data in and we want to create a name from the data that we have. So maybe the first event we read in, we get the first name and we say first name equals Harry. Again, I like camel case. However you want to name your variables, that's fine. The last name equals Kunkelmeyer. There are reasons why we want to keep the first and the last name separate. One of the most simple is if we want to sort on last names and we've got them combined, it becomes very difficult. However, if we want to print Harvey Kunkelmeyer's name out, the easiest way to do it then is to create a new variable called name, and we have first plus space last. And that would print out Harvey Kunkelmeyer. There are some other options we can use with concatenations as we go through. And we'll talk about those as we get to them. Page 50, sometimes when we're printing out the results of our script run, we want to run dividers in there. Blank lines sometimes can get confusing. So this is an easy way to do it. I think we talked a little bit about it as we went through our boot camp. But here I've got a variable called myDivider. It equals a star. And what I've told Python is times 50. So every time I put in my divider, it's going to run times 50. And so it'll print out this code. This is not the code, by the way. Check the book and get the right code. I just wanted to show you an example. The following is the correct code, though. I've got my variable equals 741, my friend equals Harvey Kunkelmeyer, and now I want to print my friend plus my variable. Python says, oh, no, you're not, because that's an error. You cannot print a string and a numeric value in the same line. What you need to do is convert it. And so we've got a handy option to convert this to a string. Yes, there are other ways around it, but this is to demonstrate the string manipulation. So all we're doing in line 34 is just putting the modifier string around my variable, and now it prints out Harvey Kunkelmeyer 741. Not rocket science, pretty simple, but you'd be amazed the number of times it happens to me, it happens to students, where you're trying to print out a character string and a numeric value and you keep getting an error. And then it's a dope slap. I forgot. You got to convert it to a string. Or do a whole lot of other manipulations that aren't really necessary. Here's another example. What we're looking at is my friend Harvey Kunkelmeyer, line 36, and we're telling Python that I want to look at the first character of that string. And so the way we do that is put the variable name, square brackets, and then whatever character we want to look at. Remember, Python starts counting a string at 0. All right, so if I want to look at the first character of Harvey Kunkelmeyer, I'm going to put square bracket and 0. Print out my first, and we get H. So we know Harvey's first name starts with H. Yeah, big deal, so what? How can we use that to our advantage? Well, let's build a scenario. And let's say that we are reading the string that we're interested in off of a data file. And we know that there's a sentinel at the end of that string that will stop it, as an example, a -1 or some kind of character that is normally not used in text. But then we want to know what the last letter of that data string is. Maybe that's how we want to stop our processing as we go through it. Think about a cryptogram, and we're going to write one in April, where we're going to read in something we've encrypted and unencrypted. Well, we want to know when we get to the very last part of that encryptogram so we can stop our encryption. So we can use that length function to figure out how we're going to do that. And you can look at this code. Line 36, line 37 are all familiar. You've seen that, but look what I did with line 38. Here I'm determining the last letter of what that string is. So I need to have an integer. I'm going to look at the length of my friend, which is the variable that has my string in it, but I'm going to subtract 1 from it. And that'll take the length -1, and now I'm going to print out my first and last. And in this case, we're just printing out the character strings, but that's what we get, H and R. So a way that we can determine values within a string function. Harvey Kunkelmeyer, you can look at and say, duh, H, R, okay? But if we've got a string that's 5,000 or 6,000 characters or 1,000,000 characters long, and we need to determine that in character, it's going to be a lot easier to do it this way than it is to go ahead and try and sort through it and find it on your own. By the way, I'll bring in my Python logbook. I have little code examples like this that I paste into a book. And so when I know I want to figure out what the last character is in a string, I can just open my notebook and go to that code and say, oh yeah, this is how you do it. Works well. I learned that trick from an ace programmer out at Tinker many, many years ago. Page 53, we're looking at some other things that we can do with strings. Lower, upper, that's pretty intuitive. We're going to create uppercase, we're going to create lowercase. But the next one, replace old and new, that's a little bit different, and sometimes that's tricky to use. So I'd like you to put in the following code, line 41 through 44. Go ahead and type that information in and look at how it works. You might want to put in the following code, line 46 through 49. And this is an old typing test that we used to do for time. Now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their party. However, that's not politically correct, so we want to change men to people. Very simple. With the replace key. So again, it can be text, it can be a name, it can be a numeric value. Using replace will change every instance of that event within your text string. Let's take a look at one more function before we wrap it up, or one more tool that we can use. And we started 5 minutes early, so you're still going to get your money's worth. The last thing that we'll look at out of chapter 2 today is how we can format numeric values as we present them on the screen. And again, this is done by using some tools that we have available to us. So if you put in lines 51 and 52 and print it out, you'll notice our price prints out as 77.60. All right. Yes, that's correct, but it probably needs to be more correct. So I'll give you a second. So what we do is we use our old friend, the percent sign again. And notice how it's set up. The current price, percent 10.2F. So we're telling it we want a decimal, we want 2 places, and this is actually a floating value. And now when you run the program after you've made the modification, it prints out as 77.60. Notice how line 52 is set up also, because this is a little different than the .format command we used. Here we've got what we're going to print on the screen. Here we've set up how we want it to print out, the format. We don't use any format command. We just put a percent sign in front of our variable after the quote marks and then our closed parentheses. Which way do you want to use? Up to you, whichever one works best. In some circumstances, this might be easier to use than the .format command. Again, it's up to you. I've got a homework assignment for you. Very, very simple, but you need to do it before next Tuesday at 11 a.m. And that assignment is start on page 66, and I want you to review section 2.6, creating a window. And what I'm going to show you how to do on Tuesday, and what will be your graded assignment next week, is to create art in Python. When we did this back last fall, everybody created a talking jack-o'-lantern. We'll do something different for our class. But next Tuesday we'll start with building graphics, and then we're going to take it a little bit farther. This block 2.6 I want you to understand and be very comfortable with, because when we start the second week in April on building a Python game, you're gonna have to be able to go back and remember what you did with the window and the graphics. Questions? Yes, sir.
Turn this in on D2L?
No, you don't have to turn anything in. All I want you to do is be conversant with section 2.6, and it's about 10 pages, I think it is, 10 or 15.
So we just need to look at it, we don't turn anything
You need to look at it, make notes, whatever you want to do. Brian?
Is that the one with creating shapes and?
That's the one with creating shapes and bar graphs, and we'll take it further on Tuesday. Just get familiar with it. Now, if you're going to work on it at home, you're going to have to download an add-on into Python. And they're supposed to have it downloaded for us by this weekend in this classroom. So we'll be all ready to rock and roll. If anybody's bringing in their laptop to work on, which is fine with me, make sure that you have the this Windows graphics option installed. And you can go out and look at it online. How many people are interested in installing it at home? Okay, I'll go ahead. I've got a PDF explanation sheet that I used last summer. I'll put that out online so you can take a look at it, and it'll tell you where to go. And there are several different graphics programs out there. This will point you to one that's compatible with what they're using in the book. If you had problems with the code and you want me to sit down and troubleshoot it with you, go ahead and stay after class. I've run you for about an hour, and I want to take time to troubleshoot with those folks that want a little extra help. By the way, I want to point out something to you. The exercise that we did last Tuesday, everybody passed. I've got the grades out and updated on the D2L site. If you have a question about a grade, I used to bring the papers back into the classroom. 2 or 3 people would pick them up, and I'd haul them back to the office. So they're in the office. If you want your paper or you want to know something specific about your grade, please come over to the office, and I'll be more than happy to go over it with you. What I want to point out, though, is about 15 minutes into the assignment on Tuesday, about a third of the class was done. And at that point, I would expect you to get up and leave or work quietly. Within about 30 minutes, maybe 35 minutes, about half of the people that were remaining were done. And then the last group that was left actually took all of the remaining time to work. But they got the job done, and they got a passing score for it. What I'm pointing out is that if you want to stay in the classroom, that's absolutely fine with me. But be courteous to the other people that aren't as advanced as you are in doing the coding, so they can get their code finished and get a passing score for it. So if you want to talk, great. If you want to go out and talk and work on a computer, I'll see if Roy wouldn't mind opening up the room. But if you're going to stay in the room while we're doing an exam, I would ask you to be courteous to the other students in the class. All right, that's it. Have a good weekend. Look at 2.6, and I'll troubleshoot anybody's code who wants to stay. Yes, sir.
I noticed you put the quizzes.
Yeah.
Are those just like multiple choice?
Oh, yeah, the quizzes are all multiple choice. You can take them as many times as you want to until they expire. You will receive the highest score. And there's about 220 questions for each 25-question quiz. So you can work out the numbers on how many times you might see the same question twice. But that's how I get you to read the textbook.
I did. So when I run it, I have the main part, right? Okay. And then when I put in, let's say, do I just do one number?
No, keep going.
Okay.
No, hit enter. What's his,
I see. That's where it messes up at.
okay.
My number.
All right, let's run this again. Enter an H. Whoop, you're up in the code window. press enter. Okay, so,
This is line 25. 22.
because,
That is under space. Oh, okay.
now, no, wait, that's not it. Oh, I see.
What does it mean when it goes gray?
It means that it's not correct,
Okay.
or it's not as accessible.
Let's try